Now, in this section, we're going to look at the structure of the plasma membrane. And if we're talking about the cell as a company, then this is the bouncer or security at the door. Okay, it's going to make sure that nobody comes in who's not supposed to come in and nobody goes out who's not supposed to go out. So the plasma membrane is a protective layer that surrounds the cell. And remember, all cells are going to have a plasma membrane, and they're all going to have the same basic structure, which is a phospholipid bilayer. The phospholipid is a molecule that looks like this. Okay, so it's got a head and it's got two little tails. At the head is a little group of atoms bonded together that we call a phosphate group. Okay, it's because it's got a phosphorus in the middle, so it's called a phosphate group. And then there's this little 3-carbon molecule that we call a glycerol. And those two together are then connected to these two chains, which are called fatty acids. And these are chains of carbon and hydrogen atoms chained together, okay? You don't need to know this exact structure. You're never going to have to draw a phospholipid for me. But what I do want you to know is that the end of the molecule that has the phosphate group is what we call hydrophilic. Philia means love. So this side, which is the red ball in this diagram, this side of the molecule is hydrophilic. It loves water. Hydro means water. The other side, the fatty acids, they are hydrophobic. Hydro meaning water and phobia meaning fear. So they don't like water. And because this phospholipid has this shape where one end is hydrophilic and one end is hydrophobic, if you put a bunch of them in water, they're going to orient themselves with each other so that all of their little hydrophobic tails face away from the water and their little hydrophilic heads face toward the water. That is how they make a phospholipid bilayer. So if you look at this diagram, the little red ball is the hydrophilic head and the little yellow things are the hydrophobic tails. And you can see we have two layers of phospholipids. And one layer, this top layer, the red balls face the extracellular fluid. And the lower level, the red balls face the intracellular fluid. The extracellular fluid and the intracellular fluid are both mostly water. And these phospholipid molecules are going to naturally orient themselves this way in order to keep the tails away from the water. And in class, I'll show you a diagram of a phospholipid or a model of a phospholipid bilayer so that you can see how they just kind of naturally reorient themselves. So the extracellular fluid, that's everything outside of the cell. And then the intracellular fluid, that's the cytosol, okay? And this layer, this phospholipid bilayer, is going to go all the way around the cell and all the way around all of the membrane-bound organelles. Now, in addition to the phospholipids, there are a lot of other things that are in the cell membrane. Oddly enough, cholesterol is really, really important to your cell membranes. It sits in amongst the phospholipids and helps to stabilize them and keep them connected to each other. They're not like fully connected, but they're like drawn to each other. They're attracted to each other. Let's think of it that way. The other thing we have are a bunch of proteins that are either sitting on the membrane or embedded in the membrane, as you can see these here. And these are going to enable a bunch of different functions. And of course, different cells are going to have different membrane proteins depending on their needs. So some of these proteins are going to have things attached to them that are just there so that the rest of the organism knows what kind of cell this is. Okay, so that your pancreas knows that this is a pancreatic cell and it's supposed to be in your pancreas. Okay. We're also going to have some that transport materials in and out of the cell. So we have some channels. We're going to have some other things. We have others that just bind to something to send a signal to the inside of the cell to say, like, hey, for example, glucose is present. Do you want to do anything? You want some glucose? Do you want to do anything about that? We also have some that bind to things inside the cell to either make a new molecule or break a new molecule. And then we have some that help cells stick to each other in those places where cells need to be connected to each other. So lots of things inserted into the cell membrane to help the cell do what it's supposed to do and be what it's supposed to be. Now, the other important thing about the cell membrane is that it is semi-permeable. Now, if it were completely permeable, that would mean anything could go in and out. And if it were impermeable, that would mean nothing could cross it, right? So semi-permeable or selectively permeable is how we sometimes say it, means that some things can pass through and some things cannot. And this gives the cell the ability to control the inside of environment versus the outside environment. So fats can pass through the membrane without any help because they're just like the hydrophobic tails. So they can just sneak through. So they can go in and out of your cells without any help. Everything else, everything that's not a fat is going to need some help. Water goes through special channels that are called aquaporins. Aqua means water, porin is pore, meaning a hole. So it's a water hole. Other things such as ions and really small molecules like glucose, those are going to usually pass through a channel, not glucose, ions and very small molecules like carbon dioxide. Those are going to usually pass through channels. And that is like here, a little protein molecule that it literally has a hole through the middle that enables something to go through. Some channels are gated so that things can only pass through at specific times. We're going to talk about some of those. And then larger substances such as sugars and proteins are going to have a more complex process, either a transport protein that's literally going to transport something across the membrane by changing the protein shape, or sometimes the membrane of the cell can actually reach out and grab things and pull them into the cell. We're going to talk about that in the next lecture, which is called transmembrane transport. That's another, after we get done with cells, we'll talk about those different mechanisms. So just know that some things can go through the cell, some things can't, okay? Fats can, water can't, ions can't. Things need different kinds of channels or transports. In the next section, we are going to start talking about the organelles inside the cell.